So, boys and girls and moms and dads, we're back again with Lannis, one of our favorite scientists at the Leslie Nature Center in Ohio.
Michigan, close.
Yes, I should know this by now. In Michigan, and we have done the reptile program before, and Lannis always throws in some really great new information, and this is a time where we're all trying out a whole bunch of brand new things, which is awesome. So I'm going to turn it over to Lannis because she always has so much information, and Lannis is really great about keeping in step with the chat. So if you have a question, you can put it in at any time, as long as it has to do with the animal that she's sort of talking about. We don't want to talk about box jellyfish again. Because they're not reptiles. Hi, Maddie.
No.
But anyway, we're looking for something. We've been spent all morning looking for something. So we're going to turn it over to Lannis, and we'll see you guys in a little while.
Wonderful. And yeah, if anyone is participating that has seen this workshop when we were first airing it just a couple months ago, this could be either a good review, or let's see if there are things that may come up that are new when it comes to the animals that we are talking about. I'm sure there are a couple reptile enthusiasts out there. I myself am one of them. So we can definitely go down and talking about all the different diversity that happens in that animal group. But today, not only are we focusing on reptiles, we're also using reptiles in terms of another scientific concept called classification. We actually classify our lives. We can look at different everyday objects that we see, and we can tell these differences, how they are different, or how we as humans put them into groups based on physical features. And because there are thousands upon thousands of kinds of reptiles out there, classifying them can be a little tricky. So today the goal of meeting the reptiles is that we're going to focus on three common groups of reptiles that we find throughout the world. And as scientists, we're going to do our best to understand how we can tell them not only apart from other animal groups, but also how can we identify them from other kinds of reptiles? What physical features do we see that make them different? What adaptations or things that they use to help them survive that we scientists can use to identify them differently? And there are some tricky parts because there's so much variety in this one animal group, but we'll do our best to streamline it to at least help understand a little more about classifying different animals. Now, remember when we say classification, we're talking about looking and finding differences. A great example is just by using an object you guys see every day, and that's these, right? Now, if I were to classify something, if we're not fully familiar with that word or that concept, if I were to look at these two objects, I would first put them in the same group as writing utensils, just because we as humans use both of these objects to write. But from there, this is where we get to the differences. You can obviously tell they are different objects just by physical features you see. I can tell this object in my hand here is blue, whereas this one has a yellow coating. I can notice that this object has a lid to help protect the tip, whereas this one does not. I also know they're made of different materials because they're used to write on different surfaces. That's classification. Looking at objects that may fall into one group, but using physical features we observe to then tell them or differentiate them apart. Then we usually give them a name. This we would typically call a marker, and this we typically call a pencil, mostly because scientists like to name things, so there's lots of labels out there. Now, technically, reptiles are actually in 4 different groups. We usually have reptiles we call turtles. There's actually a poster of Michigan turtles behind me. We usually put snakes and lizards in the same group as the second group. Then we have reptiles called crocodiles, or alligators fall into a group. And then we have this very ancient reptile. It's pretty much a dinosaur. It's called a Tuatara. And while it looks like a lizard, it has a lot of big physical differences that makes it have its own unique group. So from there, that's what scientists mostly use. Today, we're going to focus on 3 types of reptiles from 2 of those groups, ones that we find most often in our habitats at least. Now, the first reptile we're going to meet, because we have quite a few we're going to meet today, is pretty easy to classify, mostly because There's one obvious feature that helps us differentiate it from really most other kinds of animals. Thanks, Katie, too, for the shout out about where tuataras are. They, too, are endangered. There's not very many of them out there. I think there's actually one that's housed in the Toledo Zoo where people can actually see them, but they're very cryptic, very hidden. So really cool that we can learn more about them. Now, you might also know or be able to easily identify the first animal we see because of this physical feature. This is also a reptile, though, that lives in Michigan. So we can then focus on its adaptations, how it survives in our woodland or forest habitats. Ready? Okay, let's see if you guys can identify what first group of reptiles we're going to look at first. Ta-da! Now, I know she's a little small. She can fit actually in one of my hands. But that doesn't mean that she's not young. This animal is actually over 15 years old. And right away, there is one ginormous feature that this animal has that helps us put it into the turtle category. So we're going to focus on turtles first. And yes, she is quite cute based on her size. The kind of turtle I have in my hand is what we call a box turtle. And box turtles are unique in that this big physical feature we use to identify turtles is actually flexible. Now, turtles, you can classify them from all other groups of reptiles because they are the only reptile that has a shell. And their shell is made out of the same material as your fingernails. You actually can scratch your fingernails just to get an idea of that texture. Well, this animal basically has one giant fingernail around its body, and it can't walk out of it. It grows with it, and it lives inside it its entire life. But there's other structures, too, that help this animal use its shell kind of as a piece of armor or the ability to protect itself. Now, box turtles are interesting. They are one of the few turtles that can box themselves inside their shell 100%. Most of us probably know that when turtles get nervous, they'll hide inside their shell, but most species can't bring their whole body inside. You'll still see their head or their legs or their tail. Well, for box turtles, if you look at the bottom part of their shell, do you see this line right here down the center? This line kind of acts like a door or a door hinge. And what it does is it allows the bottom part of this animal shell to be flexible so that when box turtles get nervous, they can actually take their shell and put it over their face, over their tail, so they look just like a rock. They don't even look like an animal anymore. And the really cool thing is that turtles, they kind of have two main parts of their shell. And so that flexibility allows her to kind of move parts of her shell independently from another. For example, you're seeing the top part of this really rounded portion of this turtle shell. The fancy term for that is called the carapace. You can also say top part. But then turtle shells are connected with this bridge to the bottom part that we were looking at here. This bottom part is called the plastron. Again, you can also say bottom part of the shell too. But here's the crazy part. This guy, she's attached to her shell. All turtles, how their skeleton works is that parts of their bones are literally attached to the underside of their shell. This is why turtles can't just walk out of their shell after a long day of work. They are born, they grow, and they live their entire lives inside their shell. Now, we can't take an inside look in her shell. She still needs to hold on to this. But I can show you a different shell from a larger turtle. We can take an inside look and see just how it works. You humans, we fall into a group we call vertebrates. And that's because we have a backbone. You actually can take a couple fingers, and if you feel the spine and the bumps on your back, that's your backbone. Well, reptiles, like turtles, they're vertebrates too. They have a backbone. Only when you look at the underside of the top part of their shell, do you see the line down the middle of the shell here? That's the turtle's backbone. That's a turtle's backbone. Their backbone is literally attached to that carapace, the top part of their shell. But there's more. Do you see the lines that are there along the side? That's this animal's rib cage, or the ribs that we have in the front of our body. Most of the bones that this turtle has is actually attached to the top part of their shell. So much so that even their shell, the inside, almost acts like a bone or a piece of their skeleton too. It's also where a lot of their organs are kept, including their lungs. And the weirdest part is that even though it looks like just this hard surface that she can't feel, This turtle can feel when something touches her shell. That's because, like our fingernail, underneath it we have a lot of nerves that allow us to feel certain sensations. Well, same thing with turtles. She can feel that I am holding her right now, or she can feel something that goes in the top part of her shell. So this shell structure is incredibly unique. I had somebody ask, what would a shellless turtle be? Well, there aren't actually any shellless turtles out there. It would be a completely different kind of animal. However, there are some turtles that have skin over their shell. We call them softshell turtles because they have this really smooth, almost velvety texture on the top part of their shell. That's because it's their skin. A lot of those softshell turtles are amazing swimmers, and having that soft, smooth texture actually allows water to move past their shell really quickly so they can swim a lot faster. They too can kind of come in a variety of sizes as well, but they still have a shell, even if it's soft. So turtles, since we use the shell to classify them, any turtle without a shell actually wouldn't be a turtle at all. Good suggestion, though. That's kind of where we get into other categories of reptiles, though. If they have a lot of features that reptiles need to have or that we use to identify them, then we find or discover new kinds of reptiles, too. Now, when we're looking at reptiles in general, one thing you may have noticed on that turtle is that she has a really dry, scaly skin. Here, I can show you right through here. This is another example from a different kind of reptile. And if you listen, kind of sounds really crunchy. Well, just by telling reptiles apart from other animals, one of the big features we use is this dry, scaly skin that they have throughout their body. Even if they live in the water, their skin can actually still get dry, which is very different from a frog or a toad. This allows reptiles to be able to live in different land habitats or drier habitats without worrying about drying up and getting sick. So the scales, or the scale-like texture, is what the main things we use to identify reptiles. If they have legs too, we'll typically use claws. Most reptiles that have claws are either excellent swimmers or they'll use them to burrow underground. So if they have legs, they will almost always have claws, kind of like our fingernails too. And then the final thing is, when we meet our next reptiles, one other thing to note is that all reptiles are what we call cold-blooded creatures. Or if you wanted to be really fancy, we use a term called ectotherms, which just means that they rely on the temperature around them on the outside to be whatever temperature their body needs to be. For example, we humans, if we use us to compare, we're warm-blooded. We are one body temperature no matter where we go. Whether we're outside in the sun, we're inside, we're out by the snow, we can keep ourselves warm. Reptiles can't. That's often why, at least in the warmer weather is out, we see reptiles basking or sitting in the sun, taking in the warmth, or why we don't see reptiles out and about frolicking in the snow. It's just too cold for them and their body to be able to survive. Okay, I like starting with turtles because it's a really easy one to classify thanks to that shell. Now things get a little tricky. We're going to focus a little more detail on our next reptile kind, mostly because here, at least in Michigan and in Canada, we don't have a lot of this kind of reptile. There's a lot of different reasons why, but what that means is we don't always get to explore them up close. And there are things on these animals' faces is that what we use to classify them apart from other reptiles. Now, I'm going to start with one. She's right next here. One that, like I said, doesn't actually live in our habitat. She's an Australian species, so she has some unique features that are specific to the habitat she lives in. But let's see if we can identify first just what kind of reptile it is to begin with. She's a little bit bigger than our turtle, so I'll make sure that folks get a really clear view. Ooh, yeah, somebody in our chat room mentioned lizard. You're absolutely right. This is totally a lizard, and a bigger one at that. Not as big as a Komodo dragon, but has a lot of the same features too. When we are identifying or classifying lizards, most often we don't look at what's on their body beyond their scales or their claws. We actually look at stuff on their face. So, for example, if I were to use this lizard as an example, if I bring her a little closer to the camera, lizards always have this hole that's on the side of their face here. I know, I poked it, I'm so sorry. That hole is this animal's ear, or ear opening. All lizards have ear holes. Even if they're these larger holes on the side of their face and they don't look at our ears, they have an eardrum on the inside, so they hear very similar to how we humans do. All lizards have them. But there's more. This lizard, if we take a closer look at her eye, you can see a line, oh, she just did it, around her eye. She has eyelids. She can blink, just like a human can too. Ear holes and eyelids, as silly as it sounds, are really important in classifying or identifying reptiles. Why? Because there's actually quite a few reptiles that don't have those features. But we can use those to help identify lizards. Now, the kind of lizard that I have is what we call a blue-tongued skink, S-K-I-N-K. Whoop, and she just did it for you. Every so often, she'll stick out her tongue, and you can see this bluish appearance on it. Well, blue-tongued skinks have a blue tongue, mostly because color in the animal kingdom usually means you're poisonous. Now, this lizard is not poisonous, but she can trick other animals into thinking she is. What she'll do, if a larger predator is nearby, is she'll actually stick out her tongue and she'll flail it around. She'll make it move as fast as she can. And she's signaling to the other animal that, see this blue tongue, I'm this big, scary, poisonous lizard, don't mess with me. Does it work? No, not every time, but it can be used to its best advantage to trick into thinking that that blue tongue means that she's poisonous and you don't want to get bitten. When in fact, this lizard isn't poisonous at all. She's a great insect hunter though, having lots of little tiny teeth and a very large mouth. Now, when I look at this lizard specifically, there are a couple other cool features you can see. If we go back to her face and you bring it up close, you can see that her face is kind of in the shape of a triangle. Well, that's important because this lizard is what we call a burrowing species, an underground species. When you live in the deserts of Australia, it gets really hot out in the summer seasons. So, to protect herself from overheating, she'll actually burrow under the sand or under rocks in order to get out of the sunlight and stay cool. You might also notice, if you look at her body, her legs are really tiny. But that's just because if you're an underground lizard, legs just kind of get in the way. They're heavy, they're bulky, and they're not as useful as you think. So a lot of reptiles that burrow underground typically have smaller limbs. They can rely on their face to act like a shovel and the long muscular body to push themselves underneath the sandy soil. Somebody mentioned that she kind of looks like an Gila monster. She does in a way too. A lot of them can have this kind of orange and black patterns. However, they don't have a tongue like this too, and often their heads are black. Blue-tongued skinks can come in a variety of colors. Most of the time, we actually see them have more of a light brown appearance. And as a lizard, they're often found as pets. Doesn't mean that lizards are easy to take care of as pets, but when somebody recognizes this individual reptile, it's usually because they've heard of them as pets before. Okay, we'll use this lizard for our basics. But since we're spending a little more time on lizards, the next reptile I have for you is a different lizard species. And it's missing something. So I'm going to need your help to see if you can figure out what's missing. Ooh, I do see another question too. Somebody was asking, how do they keep dirt or rocks out of their ears or nose if they dig with their face? Well, sometimes it's a little bit of a risk because it's true. They can get sand within their ears and within their face. Many lizards, they might have an extra flap that goes right in front of their eardrums if they're burrowing underground, and they'll close that flap as they're moving their face underground too. However, many lizards, not all, but many, once they're underground, they actually have to bring their nose back up above the surface so they can breathe. There's only a few kinds of lizards that actually excessively sneeze in order to get sand out of their nose so they can stay burrowed underground. Most lizards, though, that are burrowing species, even other reptiles too, they'll also have a flap in their nostrils that they can use to basically close their nostrils and hold their breath as they burrow underneath. Good question, though. That's an adaptation you'll need to make sure that your face doesn't get full of sand. And like I said, many of them still have to keep their nose exposed, even if the rest of their body can stay underground. That can apply for a lot of other different animals that are burrowers too, or ones that live underground like certain mammals, moles, bulls, and more. Good observation. Okay, ready? Let's see if we can figure out what's missing on our next lizard. This is also a different species, and she's a little smaller, so she's going to move, or I'm going to handle her a little differently too. But just like our skink, she also has some really cool adaptations that we have to make sure we talk about. I'm curious, too, to see if anybody knows or has an idea what kind of lizard we have. Ready? Okay. Now, mostly, we're going to look at her face, just to be able to see if we can find anything that's missing. We were focusing on facial features with our other lizard. And as I'm watching the side of her face, I think I see a hole. I think that I see a hole on the side there. It's kind of small. Her face is a little small. But let's go back to her eyes and make sure that she can see you guys. There we go. I'm wondering if her eyes are ginormous. So then we got to figure out if she's missing ear holes or maybe missing eyelids. She has legs and she has claws and she has scales, so we know she's a reptile. Somebody was saying, ooh, it's definitely the eyelids. Must mean that we were able to see that hole too. A lot of folks were saying that she's a gecko, and you're absolutely right. This kind of lizard that I have in my hand is a crested gecko, and you guys are really good at this. She's missing eyelids. Here's my favorite part. Check out how big her eyes are. She's a nocturnal creature, so having those large eyes allows her to see in the dark just by using the moon and the stars in the sky. And she does have a pupil, but it's vertical, it's up and down, and she can widen it or shorten it based on how much light is in the room. And while she does have tiny ear holes, even though her face is quite small, because her eyes are so big, you can't really fit eyelids over them. This animal has no eyelids, no way of closing her eyes, no way of getting things out of her eyes too by blinking. So here's the best part. In order for her to keep her eyes clean, this is great, this gecko has to lick her eyeballs. So she has to take her tongue, bring it up over her eye, and lick her eyeball clean. But not everybody believes me when I say that, so I make sure I get photo footage. This is what it's like when a gecko licks their eyeball. It's almost like their eye disappears for a second. Now, I know what you're thinking. How in the world can she do that? She does have a longer tongue, it's true. But what happens is her mouth stretches behind her eye. So when she needs to clean any dust or debris off her face, just takes her puts it over her eye. It's really cool if humans could do that. Some of us can touch our nose with our tongue. I definitely can't touch my eye, though. My tongue's not long enough. Oh, every so often she'll do it, too. Sometimes we can watch and see if, oh, there she goes. It's so crazy how it works. And only needs 1 or 2 licks in order to make sure she stays clean. That way she can see all of you guys really well. Nice work. But there's more to this lizard than just being able to lick her eyeballs. The other thing you may notice is that when I'm holding this animal, I'm holding her very different than from the first lizard we met. And that's because this is a jungle species, or what we call an arboreal lizard. She's a tree climber. In fact, she spends most of her life up in the trees where she can find different insects there. So I hold her as if she's climbing upwards. But geckos, especially crested geckos, have a really unique feature on their feet that make them amazing climbers. So good that this gecko can climb something as smooth as glass, like Spider-Man can. And she's not using a web or any kind of sticky substance. Here, I even have a way we can try it. I have a piece of plexiglass here in my hand. And since it's see-through, we might be able to watch how this works. I'm going to try to see if this lizard can walk vertically up this piece of glass without falling off. You ready? I'll start her near the bottom, and I'll make sure folks can watch. And let's see if she can make her way. Oh, my gosh, there she is. It's so easy. And she can work her way all the way up without hesitation. She doesn't even have to stop. All the way up to the top. Oh, she's almost there. Oh, so close. Ah, super simple, right? Now, I know what you're thinking too. Well, she must have something on her feet that helps her work. And like we said, it's not silk or a sticky substance like some animals use. It's also, funny enough, not suction cups. I know somebody was suggesting that, which is a good observation because some animals use it. What she's using to climb this glass is actually something you humans have, and that's fingerprints. Here, you can actually look at your fingerprints now. We have a lot of these little grooves or lines in the palm of our hands, and our fingerprints help us hold on to objects like a chair or our clothes or food. Without fingerprints, everything would fall right out of our hands. Well, this gecko kind of has super fingerprints. She not only has a lot more than we do, she also has these little hairs within each of her fingerprints that help her hold on and stick through something we call friction or even static electricity. Here, we'll even have her try it again. The really funky part is she doesn't just have fingerprints on her feet. She actually has them all over her stomach and her tail. So when you watch her walk up this glass, look, She actually keeps her belly and her tail on the piece of glass too, so she can stick her entire body on it. Now, it might be hard to see her fingerprints, so here, I have a different picture that we can use. This is what their toes look like when you take an up-close look. All of those white lines and dots and grooves you see are not only her fingerprints, but little pieces of the hair that run along each groove. This is what helps her stick to really any surface, including something as smooth as glass. You want to know the best part, though? From there, we humans, we're actually trying to make gloves that have the same fingerprints that this gecko has, so one day we can climb buildings just by using our hands and our feet, just like Spider-Man almost in a way, to climb something as smooth as glass. Takes a lot of work, but this animal is a great example of how we can try to do it too. It just kind of looks like a shoe. That's a really good observation. I saw somebody ask what's her name. This animal doesn't actually have a pet name, even though we do know some people that have crested geckos as pets. And it's mostly because we think of this animal as a teacher. And so she's teaching you right now about wild crested geckos. Therefore, we just use a name that we would typically find these guys if they were out in the wild. So she is called the Crested Gecko. It's a very proper name for this animal. Good question, though, because there are some other places that do name their animals. Very true. Okay, we focused a lot on lizards, and we still have one other reptile group to get to. And this one, I bet many people will be familiar with, mostly because we actually find a lot of variety or a lot of different species, both in Michigan and in different parts of Canada, too. And it's mostly because these individual reptiles have figured out really cool ways to adapt to a variety of habitats. Oh, somebody said they even had a crested gecko before. That's awesome. This crested gecko we have actually used to be somebody's pet. They just weren't able to take care of her anymore, which is why we now have her and have her be a teacher for you guys. Ooh, some people are already guessing our third reptile group. I see somebody says snakes. Snakes are a pretty common type of reptile, it's true. Well, let's see if we can use our classification skills and determine whether or not this reptile that I have is, well, indeed a snake. Okay, well, first things first, I can see it has scales all over its body, so it has to be a reptile. It doesn't have a shell, so it can't be a turtle. So then we have to look at some of the other features we were mentioning. First and foremost, snakes don't have any legs, and I so far don't see any legs on this reptile in my hand, so it could be a snake. But snakes are actually missing way more features on their body. I know the snake is kind of small, but if we bring its head a little closer, you'll notice it doesn't have a hole on the side of its face. Snakes don't have any ear holes, none whatsoever. So they don't actually hear the way you and I do. But don't worry, they can still sense sound. Snakes have these really wide belly scales. The black stripes that you see along this snake, that's her belly scales. And what happens is they're wide, so that way they're allowed to feel sound better on the ground. Sound is just really a bunch of vibrations or waves. If you stomp your feet on the ground right now, you can probably feel that stomp or the vibrations you're making. So snakes, as they slither along the ground, they're feeling vibrations of sounds around them. That's how they hear, or at least how they sense sound, a little differently than using ears like ours. But there's more. Snakes also, just like that gecko, don't have any eyelids. No snake can blink. I always tell folks you can never win in a staring contest with a snake. They would always win. But hold on a second. We also learned with that gecko that in order to keep her eye clean and clear, she had to lick them. She even did it for us. And yes, snakes do stick out their tongue pretty often, but they don't use it to lick their eyeballs. What he's doing right now is he's just sticking his tongue out to smell the air around us, including smelling you through the video screen. So then how in the world can a snake protect their eyes? Well, remember this? We showed you the skin ahead of time to talk about reptiles. This is actually skin from a snake. Snakes and all reptiles shed their skin throughout their lives. And usually snakes shed it all at once, so it kind of looks like a really long, dry noodle. Well, they also have a scale on their eye. We call it a spectacle. It's kind of like wearing sunglasses. Only when they're wearing glasses and when they have to shed that eye scale, it actually turns blue. Here, I have a really great picture. This is what happens when a snake sheds their skin. Now, that blue coloration helps the snake to protect their eyes as the scale around their eye gets shed off. But the problem is that when snakes are shedding their eye scale, they're blind. It's kind of like sunglasses that, well, turn blue. For where when they're walking around or trying to slither around looking for things, they actually can't see what's around them because of the blue tint. So many times when we're looking or we find snakes out in the wild, we don't see them when they're shedding their skin because it just makes them too nervous. They try to find a safer place to hide since they know they won't be able to see what's around them. I see a couple folks in the chat room talking about that. It's cute. And somebody's even seen different kinds of boas or snakes as well. And I love how somebody knew the kind of snake that I had. The kind of snake that I have is what we call an eastern hognose snake. And we can tell because it has this triangle or little tip on its nose, kind of like a smushed up nose like a pig. It doesn't oink though. It's just the shape of its nose. A great shovel to burrow underground. But there's more. See, just like how we talk about other features of our reptiles, we have to talk about the main feature for hognose snakes, and that's how they defend themselves. Now, this snake is pretty small, and they don't get much bigger than this out in the wild. So this animal has a fair amount of predators, including animals like raccoons. So when this animal encounters a predator, hognose snakes have to play dead, or play dead like a possum. But from there, it's hilarious how it works. One thing that happens, kind of like a three-step process, or first thing that happens when they encounter a predator is they have these really puffy cheeks or extra skin on their cheeks. So first, they'll expand those cheeks and they'll hiss to make them kind of seem and look like a tiny cobra, to make them look more intimidating and huge to that predator. But that doesn't really work. So then what hognose snakes will do is they'll go to the bathroom and then they'll roll in it. They actually roll in all of their waste to try to make them smell as terrible as possible so no predator would want to eat them. However, there are animals out there that eat dead animals, or animals that smell terrible, or there are just some animals that can't even smell. So not even that works. So then, from there, hognose snakes will stick up. They'll flip themselves upside down, and they'll freeze. They'll play dead. They'll pretend they're this really stinky, dead, rotting animal that's upside down in the sun. And they'll wait, and they'll wait. Sometimes they'll do it multiple times where they flip themselves over just to convince that predator that he's actually dead. To where an animal like the raccoon will say, no thank you, I don't want to eat dead animals today. Walk away, and then once this hognose snake knows it's safe, it flips himself back over and slithers on his merry way. It's a crazy, dramatic behavior we don't often see in reptiles like snakes. So that's what makes hognose snakes so unique. Really works too, since there aren't a lot of predators out there that want to eat dead animals. Somebody had a really good comment that rubber boas kind of look like giant worms. It's true. Rubber boas are pretty small and they have what looks like very smooth scales. So in some ways they do look like worms. This hognose snake actually sometimes is often confused as a rattlesnake because of these scales, and sometimes it'll use its tiny tail and shake it like a rattler. That's just another way for it to seem more intimidating. In fact, here in Michigan, we have a lot of snakes that sometimes are mistaken for rattlesnakes because of their color pattern. But okay, classifying these reptiles was pretty easy. We were able to see big physical features that were either there or missing to put them in those three different groups. So now I have a test. What I'm going to do is I have one other reptile, a mystery reptile. I'm not going to tell you anything about this kind of reptile because I'm going to see if you guys can discover out of the three reptile groups we've talked about, snakes, lizards, and turtles. If you can find the physical features we discussed to help identify those groups on this reptile, this helps you figure out what kind of reptile I have. Now, I can tell you that this isn't a reptile that is native to Michigan or Canada. In fact, this isn't even a reptile native to the United States. So many of us may not have seen this kind of animal before. We'll take about 30 seconds. Remember, too, while we're doing this, you can also put other comments or chats inside that chat room, or you can put your answer in there, too, if you want to let me know what kind of reptile you think this is. You guys ready? Okay. Let's see if we take a closer look at our mystery reptile and what kind of reptile it could be. Now, I'll let you look at its body first. So we'll look at its whole body, its size, kind of the shape or features too. We'll also look at its face because we focused a lot on facial features. And I can see it has this really long body. It actually has a really long tail too, which is pretty cool. But let's go ahead and take a closer look at its face. So we'll look at some of the features. We focused a lot on ear holes and eyelids, and that some of these guys had them, some of them weren't. Turtles also have ear holes and eyelids, but it's one thing we didn't recognize, mostly because we just used the shell. Ooh, somebody says maybe it was an egg-eating snake. I have somebody says maybe it's a legless lizard. Somebody says they see that there's ear holes there. Okay, so that would suggest it's not a snake if you see ear holes, but it also, at least from what I see, doesn't have any legs, and we usually identify snakes as not having any legs, so it's unique. What else could we see? Sometimes, too, we focus on eyelids. Not all lizards had eyelids, but maybe this one does if it's a lizard, or maybe if it doesn't, then maybe it's a snake, too. We also learned that snakes don't have eyelids. And its scale pattern is pretty interesting as well. Oh, we can even see how it moves, too, to give us a better idea. We'll give you guys about 5 more seconds to take a closer look at how this reptile goes. Ooh, somebody also said it's a lizard. Interesting. What interesting features. Oh, she's even sticking her tongue out, though. Even a snake-lizard hybrid. Ooh, that would be pretty cool. Well, believe it or not, the name or kind of reptile that I have in my hand is what we call a legless lizard. In fact, there are many kinds of legless lizards out there in the world. So we can't actually use legs as a way to identify lizards versus snakes. But that's why we go back to those facial features. We can probably see there's a really tiny hole along the side of this reptile's face. That's her ear holes. That's her ear opening. And I know she's moving quite a bit, but if we take a closer look at her face where her eyes are, oh, there you go. You can see a line. She, too, has eyelids. And even though lizards do stick their tongue out and can smell a little bit, like snakes can with their tongue, those big features, those ear holes and eyelids, are the key ticket to knowing she is a lizard and not a snake. But there's something more. Remember that first lizard we met, that blue-tongued skink? Remember how she had these really small legs and a face that looked like a triangle? Well, this lizard is kind of the same way. Her shape, or face too, is also in the shape of a triangle, and this lizard has just kind of learned that it doesn't really need legs to move itself, especially underground. This is another burrowing species, or an underground lizard, and from there she just uses her long muscular body, kind of like a snake, to maneuver through the soil, and her shovel-shaped face to push soil like dirt and sand out of the way. And since legs are just really heavy, these guys over time have learned they don't really need them. They can use their muscles in a different way to move. And so from there, we find many legless lizards out there. We sometimes even call this kind a glass lizard, because like many lizard species, she can lose her tail. But that's a little bit of a harder or complicated feature. When she loses it, it shatters like glass, so they were given the name glass lizard. Now I know we are almost out of time, so I'm going to pause for a second, and I want to make sure that there's either no other questions in our chat room that folks wanted to address, or that if Katie and Molly had any other thoughts or questions for us today too. Let's see what we can see. Well, go ahead, Molly.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, I've seen this session a couple of times, and every single time I learn something different. And I have never seen the gecko lick its eyeball before.
I know, I was thinking about that too.
Awesome. Yeah, and all the times I've seen it, that's the highlight of my week so far.
I do have one question in the chat room. It's a pretty comical question. I really like it. How do I remember all these things about animals? It has taken me years to learn and remember all these facts. One of the really cool things about science in general is that even if I called myself a biologist, there's still a lot I don't know, and that means for my job, I have to make sure I go looking and learn for these facts every single day. So the only reason I've learned or know a lot about these animals is because I've spent a long time studying them or trying to learn about them. But believe me, I definitely don't know everything about reptiles. In fact, there's a lot that I still want to learn more about them. And that's the really cool thing about science, is that you can really keep discovering, even if you already know a lot.
Now, Lannis, I noticed back a while ago that John Paul had a question when you were handling the turtle about whether, I think he was wondering whether the animals are scared or not when you hold them like that.
love that question. Thank you. This turtle, too, is a little young, so she might actually even look a little more nervous than some of our other animals. One of the things we do here at our nature center is any of the animals we use in programs, they actually have to go through certain training in order to do these kinds of programs. In fact, if we ever go to schools or big public events, sometimes we can only take certain reptiles because others get really nervous. And so it's my job whenever I handle them to make sure I'm looking for behaviors that, one, shows me they're comfortable, or two, shows me they're nervous. If that box turtle was completely covered inside her shell, meaning we couldn't see her legs and her face, yes, that's usually a signal that she's not comfortable, and that would mean that I should put her away, because that way we wouldn't want to make her too nervous. Luckily, since she was able to sit there and still poke out her head and her legs, that gave me the sign that she was still comfortable. It's really cool, though, to see that our audiences also look for those behaviors, because it's not something we talk about as often. So really cool question.
Could you maybe elaborate then, Lannis, because I'm also interested?
Yeah.
The animals that we saw today, the turtle would put its head in if it was scared. What would a snake do if it was scared?
A big behavior, or a big what we would call negative behavior, would be if any of these animals tried to bite. Mostly because that's usually their main source of defense or protection, is that if they have a predator nearby and they can't get away from it, they'll try to bite first and then ask questions later. Since none of the animals bit me, that's one good sign of comfort. Sometimes for the snake, that hognose snake specifically would do that behavior where it might puff out its cheeks or it might hiss too. For things like our lizards, they also can make a hissing noise if they feel threatened, especially that larger one. Sometimes, too, they might open their mouth and show or display their tongue, but they'll be or do it so fast that we almost can't even see it. But that's just because, especially for our blue-tongued skink, we mentioned how she uses it to intimidate animals. The other thing that I have to look for is that they feel like they're trying to get away. So if they feel like they're physically trying to move out of my arms into a different surface. Since most of them are pretty comfortable moving, but none of them attempted to run away, that's also a physical behavior that I can use to judge whether or not they're comfortable or stressed. But usually biting or hissing are the big indicators of reptiles if they get nervous.
And we have a question from Charlotte and Isaiah about keeping reptiles as pets. So there's some that are better for pets, or
that's a good question.
Pets?
The big thing with reptiles is that you want to make sure, even before you think of having any kind as a pet, you do your research on the nutrition and temperature requirements, because those are usually the big things that can keep our reptiles healthy. But also, if those two factors are off, reptiles can get sick really easily in captivity. Probably the easiest reptile to take care of is there's a kind of lizard called a bearded dragon. And I say that specific kind just because the ones that we might find at pet stores or in captivity, they've been bred with humans or bred in captivity for over 40 years. So they're very used to being in human environments. There's also a ton of information about bearded dragons versus other kinds of reptiles that help you learn about what temperature they need to be, what they eat, what's a good part of their diet, all different parts of their habitat that you want to put in an aquarium and more. So if I had to suggest a specific reptile, that's usually the one I geared people towards, just because there's so much information about them that's easily accessible for folks.
That's excellent. Just so that I think with any pet, know what they need and know how you can help them live their best life. That is awesome. And Emily said, what about leopard geckos? Are they okay pets too?
Those are pretty good too. I don't know how long they've been bred in captivity versus that of a bearded dragon. I do know that leopard geckos are also pretty common, and they don't need as much enrichment in their habitat, so things and stuff to do, mostly because they're also nocturnal. And so a lot of times I've heard of leopard geckos being a good starter reptile pet too, if somebody is interested in lizards specifically. So yeah, that's a pretty good one.
And Aaron said if he gets a lizard, he would name it Tad Cooper.
Not a bad name.
That's a good name. I like that. It's that he has put so much thought into that.
Exactly.
You know that Aaron often does. So I just want to thank you, Lannis, for another great session. I know that we have some more booked with you.
Yeah.
And we're really excited to meet that turkey vulture when we can figure that out.
Yeah.
I know. That'll be really awesome. And thanks for teaching us so many cool facts about reptiles, and especially creating that opportunity where the gecko could lick its eyeball. That was just
Wasn't planned, so I'm glad it happened.
Thanks so much, Lannis.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for having us. Bye.
Okay. We'll see you guys later for dance if you're coming.